You are 13 years old. Your ankles are swollen, your skin clammy with fever. The contractions come like knives, sharp and unforgiving, and your screams echo through the corridors of a stone manor that should have been your childhood home. But childhood was taken from you. Now you are a girl dying to bring forth a boy. Your name is still Margaret Beaufort. You are not yet a mother. You are not yet a queenmaker. But your body is breaking to build an empire. You were born in 1443 into the Beaufort line, powerful, royal-blooded, and damned. Your father, John Beaufort, returned from France accused of treason, stripped of favor, and possibly driven to suicide. You were a baby when it happened, too young to remember his face, but old enough to bear his shame. His death didn't just leave you fatherless. It left you vulnerable and valuable. At the age of 1, you were sold, not in chains, but in marriage contracts. Your father's will was ignored by King Henry VI, who handed you off to one of his favorites, William de la Pole. You were engaged before you learned to read. You were 7 when the match collapsed. Not because you spoke, but because your guardians lost favor. Your worth was never your own. Only your womb had value. At 12, you were married to Edmund Tudor, the king's half-brother. You didn't choose him. You didn't understand him, but he took what the crown had given him, a young bride with royal blood and fertile hips. Within a year, you were pregnant, and then he died of plague in a Welsh prison. You carried his child alone through war, widowhood, and the cold ache of terror. Your labor was catastrophic. The chroniclers said you nearly died. Because you were still a child, your pelvis too narrow, your bones unformed, your voice weak from crying. But you survived. The baby boy you gave birth to, Henry Tudor, would one day wear a crown. But that moment, your survival was no triumph. It was a curse that would follow you forever. You never bore another child. Something broke inside. They called you Lady the King's mother one day. But before that, you were nothing but a girl with a torn body and a silenced voice. No ballads were written for you. No one mourned your pain. You endured. And in that endurance, silent, strategic, scarred, you would shape the future of England. But first, you had to survive the next betrayal. You did not raise your son. That decision was taken from you too. As soon as Henry was born, the boy was swept away, given to caretakers, shuttled between noble houses. They said it was custom, but you knew the truth. A young mother was dangerous, especially one like you, smart, royal, calculating. So they kept you away from your own flesh. And you watched from afar, as the only person you had ever bled for was raised to forget your face. You turned to God, not out of peace, but because there was nowhere else to go. Religion became your weapon. Fasting, flagellation, ritual. You beat your guilt into the marble floor, prayed the ache from your hips, and built a cage of piety around your fury. They called it devotion, but you were preparing for war. A war fought with silence, alliances, and letters inked with vengeance. Your body had been used. Now your mind would be your revenge. While other widows wept, you studied. While they remarried, you manipulated. You mastered court politics with the quiet patience of someone who'd already tasted death. No one suspected the child mother would become a master strategist, but you were already playing the long game. To reclaim your son, to reclaim your name, to place a Tudor on the throne. The Wars of the Roses tore England apart. York versus Lancaster, cousin against cousin, chaos in every corner. You were the ghost in the middle, Lancastrian by blood, mother to a child in exile, powerless yet quietly essential. Men fought and died. You made them useful. You weren't born to lead armies, so you led bloodlines. History forgets what it does not understand. They called you cold, ambitious, unfeeling. But how do you feel after watching yourself be carved open at 13? How do you trust after being handed off like livestock? How do you love when even your son becomes a stranger? You didn't need to be loved. You needed to be feared, because England would burn before you let your pain go unanswered. This was the beginning, not of a reign, but of a reckoning. You weren't meant to matter. You were meant to bleed, obey, and disappear. But your suffering did something the crown could not. It created resolve. It created a king. And in that moment, cold, bruised, forgotten, Margaret Beaufort chose vengeance disguised as destiny. You never forgot the cold stone floor of that birthing chamber. So when they took your son, you remembered. Every letter he never sent. Every season he spent away from you. Every year they kept him hidden. For his protection, they said. But you knew the truth. A child born of your blood, with a claim to the throne, was a threat. And a mother like you, calculating, royal, devout, was dangerous. They feared you more than they feared the wars tearing England apart. So you watched, and you waited. You stitched your grief into tapestries, embroidered names into prayer books, and memorized the movements of men with swords. Every Lancastrian defeat carved deeper into your resolve. Every Yorkist victory made your silence more strategic. You wore widowhood like armor, the perfect disguise for a woman plotting revolution. Edward IV ruled England, a York, a king by conquest. But you were already gambling on the future. Your son, Henry Tudor, was in exile, a fugitive child claimant across the sea in Brittany. Safe, forgotten, alive. But you knew history doesn't reward the forgotten. It remembers the ruthless. So you aligned with enemies, befriended those who could not be trusted, wrote letters sealed with wax and veiled threats. And when Edward IV suddenly died and his young son vanished, you acted. The princes in the tower were never found. 2 royal boys disappeared, and Richard III took the throne. He called himself king. You called him opportunity, because now England was grieving. And grief is malleable. Your son was still in exile, but you were here, in England, pulling strings with a prayer book in one hand and a knife in the other. You aligned with Elizabeth Woodville, the Yorkist queen whose sons had vanished into darkness. 2 mothers, 2 enemies, united by grief and revenge. You struck a deal in secret. Your son Henry Tudor would return from exile and marry Elizabeth of York. A union of red and white, Lancaster and York. 2 bloodlines sewn together with the thread of survival. You were making peace with the woman whose husband had usurped your cause. Not for love, but for the throne. Then came Bosworth, 1445, the turning point. Your son landed on English soil with a foreign army, and your ambition burning behind his eyes. You were not on the battlefield. You didn't need to be, because your fingerprints were already on every sword. Richard III died in the mud, screaming under a heap of blades. The crown was pulled from a bush and placed on your son's head, right there on the battlefield. And in that moment, Margaret Beaufort became more than a mother. You became destiny. But this was not your ending. It was your beginning. Henry was king. But you were the reason. The architect of a dynasty. The woman who played 20 years of chess with kings, queens, and corpses. They said you dressed in black from that day forward. That you took a vow of chastity even after remarrying. That you signed your letters Margaret R., like royalty. Not the queen, but the king's mother. A title carved out of pain and precision. You ruled through him, not behind a curtain, but beside the throne. When Henry married Elizabeth of York, it was your plan. When laws were passed, you were consulted. When your grandson was born, Arthur, you whispered his name like a prayer answered. You had given England a new bloodline, the Tudors, born not from love, but from vengeance perfected. Yet even in triumph, you never softened. You were not the warm mother of legend. You were the steel beneath the crown. And though history would call your son king, it was your will that brought the crown to his head. Your cold survival, your broken body, your endless patience. You had buried husbands, buried God, buried the girl you once were. Now, all that remained was the architect, a mother with no children at her table, but kings kneeling at her feet. He was king now, and you were finally, what? Safe, fulfilled? No, because kings are never safe. And mothers like you, women forged in childbirth pain and political betrayal, know that power must be guarded, sharpened, used. You had not built a crown just to watch it slip. And so you built walls around your son, around the throne, around your legacy. You advised him on everything. Marriage alliances, tax policy, treason. You controlled his court like a holy woman running a convent. You insisted no one, not even his wife, would outrank you. You sat at royal banquets on equal footing with the queen. You wore the royal colors. You signed decrees. And when anyone questioned it, you reminded them, you had made the king. But kings are not sons forever. And Henry, your child of prophecy, began to drift. He trusted others. His wife, Elizabeth of York, gave him heirs, boys with Yorkist blood. You had allowed this alliance for power. But the blood of your enemies now ran through your grandchildren. Arthur, Margaret, Henry, children born from compromise. You watched them grow with the eyes of a strategist, not a grandmother. When Arthur, your golden heir, sickened and died in Ludlow Castle, the kingdom wept. You did not. You prayed. You watched Elizabeth of York break from within. The queen fell into grief, and with her went the Yorkist balance. That suited you. But when Elizabeth died, something shifted. Your son wept openly. He crumbled. And for the first time, Margaret Beaufort feared loss, not as a theory, but as a sentence. You were aging. Time, the one enemy you could not convert, was coming for you. And your son, now hollowed by grief and isolation, was falling into shadows. He trusted no one, not even you. The king you created was now a paranoid warden of his own crown. And yet you understood. Because you were the same. You turned to religion, not to soften, but to cleanse. You endowed colleges, built chapels, translated theology. Not to redeem yourself. You believed you were already God's instrument, but to immortalize your name. Margaret Beaufort, foundress, patron, architect of divine kingship. Even heaven, you thought, should know your worth. And then Henry died. Your son, your triumph, faded under candlelight. You did not weep. You moved quickly. You orchestrated the funeral, chose the Latin verses, controlled the procession, because the next king was not ready. Your grandson, Henry VIII, was just a boy of 18. You had no time for grief, only duty. For 72 days you ruled England. Behind the veil of mourning, you ensured a clean succession. You oversaw coronation plans. You silenced rivals. You guided the crown into the hands of the next Tudor. No woman had ever done what you did, not as a queen, but as the king's mother. Then quietly your body began to fail. Your voice softened. Your steps slowed. The power you carried, the vengeance you fed for decades, it had kept you alive longer than most. But now, in your private chapel, surrounded by candles and the smell of ink and old vellum, you finally bent. They buried you in Westminster Abbey, near the king, near the throne, but not in a queen's place. That didn't matter, because your legacy was not carved in gold. It breathed in the veins of every Tudor heir. It lived in the laws you shaped, the institutions you built, the bloodlines you forced to unite through pain. You were never crowned, never adored, never sung in ballads. But you won. You outlived your enemies. You reshaped a broken kingdom. You turned a child's agony into a weapon. And from that weapon, you created a dynasty. They call it the Tudor Age. They teach it in schools, gilded portraits, golden courts, the glory of kings. But the age was not born in a crown. It was born in blood. In a 13-year-old girl screaming through the night, her hips splitting open to deliver a boy. And that girl was you. The historians remember your grandson, Henry VIII, his 6 wives, his severed heads, his monstrous appetite. They remember Elizabeth of Fermor, your great-granddaughter, the Virgin Queen, the empire builder, the face on coins. But they do not remember you with awe, only with footnotes. Lady Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, as if motherhood was all you ever did. They don't see what it cost. The silencing. The forced wedding at 12. The tearing of your womb before it was ready. The nights spent praying not for salvation, but for strategy. They don't see the bodies buried behind your eyes. Your enemies. Your friends. Your own innocence. Because you sacrificed everything. And everyone for one thing. Control. Not love. Not comfort. Not peace. You wanted safety. And in your world, safety only came through power. You built that power like a cathedral. Stone by stone, lie by lie, deal by deal. You married off children to end civil wars. You buried emotions to stabilize crowns. You wore black like armor. You ate alone. You slept in cold rooms with maps and holy books. Even your piety was political. You weren't soft with God. You negotiated with Him. You founded colleges not for learning, but for legacy. You funded churches not for prayer, but permanence. You gave England saints and scholars, but what you really gave it was survival. And yet, in the end, you were still a woman, a mother, a girl who had bled on stone floors and never recovered. You carried that pain into every decision. You weaponized it. You made sure no one else would ever control your body, your fate, your legacy again. That's what they miss. This wasn't just ambition. This was a war cry from a woman who had been devoured by the system and decided to devour it back. You were not kind. You were not fair. But you were necessary. The Tudors owe their dynasty to a girl who was never supposed to survive childbirth, to a mother who turned grief into policy, to a widow who outlived every threat. And when the kings are gone, when the palaces crumble and the portraits fade, your story will remain. Not because they praised you, but because you endured when no one else could. That is your crown. Invisible, undeniable, permanent.